Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Dr. Shana Powell. I'm a registered naturopathic doctor in the state of Colorado and owner of West Elks Wellness here in Montrose. This week, I have a good friend of mine, Lisa Pomerantz, who's also a naturopathic doctor, talking today on spiritual growth and authenticity in a changing field. We're going to have some, a little bit of conversation around some interesting topics today that are a little touchy, if you will, and I appreciate that. We're going to talk about what is spirituality or spiritual growth and the abuse of spiritual power, because that is definitely a thing that is being seen not only in the psychedelic realm, but also just in general, like people exploring religion and different faiths and struggling with it. Psychedelics, Indigenous cultures, and how can we be respectful and what that looks like and what to look out for as far as red flags, perhaps. And also touching on the fact that there is a brokenness of orphaned cultures, what that is, who that includes, and how can we remedy that and help bring solutions to this world that is literally aching for some kind of deeper connection than what we currently have. So I'll turn it to you, Lisa. Can you do a little introduction for yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Lisa Pomerantz. I'm a registered naturopathic doctor in Colorado. I've been in practice for 4 years, and I had been practicing for the majority of that time in Frisco, Colorado, in the mountains. And now I'm in transition, moving back to the Front Range to reinvent what my practice looks like, to offer even more care. My focus is on mental health, but I am seeing all various conditions in order to treat the whole person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to ask you, Lisa, what exactly is spirituality or spiritual growth?
Yeah, it's defined in so many different ways. For me, I define it as a connection to something greater than ourselves.
Okay. Something greater than ourselves, so we're getting a little bit into like the ethereal realm of like, the universe, the Godhead, the innate intelligence, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. And I have heard it defined as a connection to ourself, of a awareness of ourself, and I think that that's because knowing ourself is knowing the universe at large. And so I like that, but I think that you can do that without a spiritual sense. And so specifically that concept of spirit is feeling that there is something bigger than ourselves, there's something that connects all of us perhaps, and developing some sort of way to bring that into your life.
Interesting. So the different than religiosity, where there's actually like a group, so thinking about Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, where there's like a group of people and there's like books and like, gurus or followers type of a thing. This is different than that. This is a little more maybe personal in a way.
Yeah. There's a term called spiritual but not religious. So it's just taking all of the religious structure out of it and creating a spirituality for yourself.
Okay.
And that's not to say that if you are a religious person that you can't have a spiritual practice as well. Spirituality is enveloped under the umbrella of connection to some sort of God source. Okay. And so religion does it also. But in this day and age, religion hasn't been working for a lot of people. Yeah. And so without, this is foreshadowing, with so many people feeling orphaned from a more traditional spirituality, they're creating it for themselves. And so that's what I had to do for me. I had to build my own concept of spirituality.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. It's, there was a point in my life where I was identified as an atheist, and I've shared this before, that I was never more miserable and like awful of a person to be around. I was so negative, so pessimistic, and one of the worst things I ever said, and like I think back to this person that I said it to, I said, God is for weak people. And why I reflect on that now is, one, I was a miserable piece of shit person then. Like, not that I was making bad choices, but like the way that I moved through the world and the like goo that I like oozed was unpleasant to be around, even for myself. And I'm not saying that that's how all atheists are, but that was my experience, and I've shared this with another friend who also had a similar experience. And when I had my like spiritual awakening, it was science that brought it back for me. Strangely enough, a developmental biology class, and we're studying chick embryos, and my teacher's like, so the arm bud cell is the same cell as the leg bug cell, but it knows to become a wing and it knows to become a chicken foot. And I'm just like, it's the same cell. How does it know? There's got to be an innate intelligence there. And I was just like, my mind, like that, little mind-blowing emoji, like my mind just opened up and I was like, there's something greater beyond ourselves. So when people say science actually can't, it takes away from our spirituality, I'm like, no, you're missing the grand design then. At least from my perspective.
I agree with you. I think the fun thing about mixing science and spirituality is to entertain the idea of what we have discovered and what we have not. And to enjoy that magic is science that we haven't explained yet.
For sure. Oh, that's so true. So I created my own like spiritual concepts, and this is something one of my previous guests and I have chatted about as well, Ryan. In that I was practicing spiritual materialism, and I was just like, oh, this is an interesting concept. Where I was picking and choosing. I've studied several religions. I really enjoyed my world theology classes that I took in college, and like picking up, like I've got a Bhagavad Gita. I don't really actually have a Christian Bible, even though I grew up Baptist Christian, and I've read a little bit of the Quran, and I've been studying Baha'ism as of lately. So I'm like very curious about these other cultural religions to deep dive into. However, my own practice has been what's guided me to like, okay, I'm going to take some time and like sit under a tree, or I'm going to sit by the river and like, think about things. And one of my teachers, Robert, he said, the thing about water is that's where our ancestors reside. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I find myself when I'm struggling wanting to go and sit by some water. And he's like, that's most likely like an intuitive thing, and it's been since I was a kid. Like, I just need to go sit by some water. And I feel like there's a lot of intuitiveness that comes into spirituality.
Very much so.
What's been your experience with that?
Well, water is cleansing also, and that's something that I've seen across every spiritual practice that I've dabbled in. And in terms of the intuitiveness, we're all seeking. Those of us that are trying to find depth and meaning through spirituality, that spiritual materialism you're talking about, we have to look to other faiths because we need we need to observe patterns, we need to observe what's working for other people to start to see what's possible. And so using that intuitive hit that you get when this works for me or this doesn't work for me, it's like trial and error. And so getting to sit and tune in with yourself and notice, is this a practice that feels true to myself or not? That's where intuition comes in.
Right.
Yeah.
Does this resonate as truth to me? I don't know if you've had any of these experiences, but I'll be having a conversation with someone and I'll be just, one of my beliefs is reincarnation. This is a concept I've been deeply rooted in since I was a child, and my pastor did not like this. But I'm like, yeah, but we just had Easter and we're talking about Jesus rising after 3 days. That's not reincarnation. I don't know what is. And he was just like, that's not reincarnation. Like, get out of my office, little girl, so dismissive. And that's one thing I do appreciate about one of the other groups I've been studying with as of late, is I get to ask those deeper questions. And while they don't believe in reincarnation, I can't ever not feel that way, because it feels true in my core. Like, it is correctly aligned with me. Not saying that it is true for everybody, but from my perspective, it makes damn good sense.
Yeah, and I believe in reincarnation also, and I'll tell you how I got to that. When I first heard about it, I liked the idea. Because the concept of going through many lifetimes, and this is the growth part, developing ourselves, sounds really nice. And then I was like, okay, it scientifically makes sense, because we cannot create or destroy energy or matter. So it makes sense that the soul would be recycled.
Yeah.
Because my thought as like a young kid when I was considering all this, where do new souls come from? So I was like, all right, we must be recycling them.
Yeah.
And then going from there, it was the intuitiveness of it. I started looking more into it. I started hearing stories of people who were recalling lifetimes, things that they could not possibly know about past cultures, children speaking different languages.
Kids, like small children.
Yeah. And so I started with the intuition, with saying, okay, this resonates with me. I started developing faith. And this is really the thing that separates spirituality from science, is because the spirituality, we'll probably never know for a fact what is right. It is possible that everything laid out on the table has the opportunity of being correct. And so we sitting here in these chairs have the opportunity of being wrong. And therefore, we need to have faith with our spiritual decisions. Yeah. And so when I finally was able to confidently lean on my faith, I was able to think to myself, I've successfully become spiritual.
Yeah, I like that. It was actually in med school that I started leaning more heavily on faith. Like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to get through this day, these tests, these 16 chapters I need to read. Like, God, give me the strength. You know, and back then I hadn't made peace with that word yet. So it was like, universe, help provide me with the strength I need to get through this day. I'm struggling, and like, just help guide me to the right direction. And I'll tell you how much easier it is to just like say, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. And you know what? To think back to my, young 20-something self that was telling people God is for weak people, I disagree. I think it's actually people that lean on faith are some of the most courageous, brave people I know. Because they're saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's tough. That's a tough place to be, not only as a scientist and a medical professional, but as a regular, plain, normal human being.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we're all so hurting. We're hurting and we're trying our absolute best. And so to say God is for the weak, it's to go through world with grit.
Yeah.
Because that's what you had, that's what you knew at the time.
Totally.
But then to begin to rely on a sense of faith, to rely on a sense of God or universe, or we have whatever word people wants to call it, it's to rely on a strength that lives in our heart. And that is eternal, that is self-restoring strength, and that is what helps us to get through this world without complete burnout.
Totally. It's like, if you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, which there's a lot of good reason to feel that we should do that. We have access to global news when we once didn't, and I often will make a recommendation to my patients, turn it off.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that you don't need to know what's going on. You will hear about the important things, and truly you will.
Yeah.
Without watching the news, without reading headlines, which are often misleading and incorrect, without getting your news from social media, can you disconnect just for a little bit and see how your nervous system feels?
Yeah.
It's like, when we start to unwind and we're not worried about the various wars and the droughts and the this and the that and the da-da-da. It's like, I can't change that there's a hurricane going on wherever. You know what I can do is help the people in my local community. That's something I can actually do and do something about, rather than being worried about things I have absolutely zero impact on.
Yeah, and I used to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, and it was killing me.
Literally.
And through my spiritual path, I realized that it really has to become just holding space and holding compassion for those that are struggling. Yeah. And that way, we don't also take on their struggles, but rather we can truly be that open-hearted ear, we can be compassionate, and we can understand contradictory plights, because there's so many different things that are happening in this world that are difficult for people, that are one person taking their stance might be harmful to another person. And so I think to be able to hold compassion for everyone's plight is also a really beautiful step on one's spiritual path.
Definitely. Being able to see from various perspectives. Another friend and I, we chat often about these types of things, and one of the conclusions her and I have come to is that when you have more flexibility in your thinking and you're able to see from multiple viewpoints, maybe not agree entirely, maybe you don't fully understand, but it's like, man, I see where you're coming from, and that sounds pretty shitty.
Yeah.
That is a big part of healing. And I would say healing and spirituality kind of go together a little bit. Not that you need to be perpetually healing, because healing is hard work, but knowing that, hey, like, I can lean back on my faith and say, hey, during this trying time, like, while I'm doing this process, and I'm going to be all right, and I'm going to be able to have more viewpoints at the end of this tunnel that I get through.
Yeah. And, coming back to reincarnation, this is why I love that belief so much. I think of it like we're in school, and each lifetime is a different grade, and it's filled with different lessons, different classes, if you will.
Sure.
And we have the opportunity to excel at those classes, or we can choose to fail at those classes. And to make it a choice gives us our autonomy.
Right.
It allows us to know that everything we do in this life, we are not victims of outcomes.
No.
Things happen to us, but we get to choose how we're going to react, what we're going to learn from those situations, and if we are going to gain strength and resiliency and more open-heartedness from it, or if we're going to shut down and turn to grit, turn to judgment.
Yeah.
So to be on a spiritual path truly is learning, truly is growth. Because like with reincarnation, then if we fail a class, we got to repeat it the next lifetime.
That's right.
And that's why people wonder why their life is so hard. This is how my faith describes it. It's because we're getting stuck in a certain type of lesson, and our spirit, our soul is having a particularly difficult time learning. And so to be so much more self-reflective, so much more self-aware, and that's where that other definition, spirituality, comes in. It gives us the opportunity to open ourselves up and grow in connection to something greater. Because I think real true growth happens when we feel connected to this world at large, especially when we notice our connection to nature. And to me, that's Mama Gaia.
Definitely.
So this entity, this being that cares for us, when we grow in a way where we can feel connected to her and we can give back to her, we can give back to her fellow children. All of this, you're not going to do that if you don't have any sort of connection to something greater. You're going to be much more on the American concept of individuality. I'm here to get my own. I'm just here to protect my family, and nothing else matters.
Right. There's a meme that's been going around on social media, and for my fellow Pokemon lovers, it looks like little Digletts that are coming up. Okay? So Diglett, for those that are not Pokemon lovers, is a ground dirt Pokemon, and he is like a little like mole, kind of. And it's basically this tree, you know, you could call it a mycelium, if you will, that's underground, and it's one entity. The collective consciousness is what I'll refer to that as. And then the little Digletts that come up the ground. So we think we're individual, but actually it's just, we're part of the same thing. We're just different manifestations, similar to like, you know, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, different manifestations of the same thing. Or in Hinduism, which is a monotheistic religion, different manifestations of God, that depending on what your needs are, you resonate with this God or that God more than another. It's all the same.
Yeah.
That's one of my big takeaways is, you know, not only from my studies of religion, but my experiences with psychedelics and my experiences sitting completely sober in nature by myself, whether it's by a river or under a damn tree. The experiences that I have of like feeling that connection, feeling part of the universal, like the, what am I trying to say? Like the collective consciousness, and like sitting there knowing that this tree that I'm sitting under is part of who I am. And it's a living, breathing entity, just as the rocks that I'm sitting next to as well. This is like taking some concepts I've learned from Indigenous cultures. It's like everything has its own place. Even these pots that are quote unquote inanimate objects, they were made by a human, probably a machine, but you know, the machine was made by a human, so it has essence of humanness in it. It still has a place, it still has a perspective.
Yeah.
Are we respecting everything and everyone that has a place and a perspective in this place, knowing that we all come from the same entity?
Yeah.
It's like profound, and like there's so many people that feel profoundly alone.
Yes.
And lonely. And if they remembered this concept, and I don't want to say realize because it's really a remembering to me. They remembered this concept, how much less loneliness, how much less suicide, how much less depression would we have if we could just, this one giant concept could be recalled.
And how much would it heal our culture to have people start to realize that we are all brothers and sisters with each other? It would heal the entire world if we could realize that. But there's so much division. There's so much finger pointing and separating out. And I think it's because people are looking for some sort of meaning. And so they're trying to put themselves in a box and figure out who fits in that box with them. Or the lone wolf type of person who's like, this is my own box. All of you don't belong because the rest of the world has harmed me.
Right.
You know, I have felt lone wolf-like in the past as well. And it's that pain that puts us in that place.
Yeah.
But if we all started to realize that oneness, and for me, it was a psychedelic experience that brought me there. I am so grateful that my friends gave me mushrooms when I was 16 years old. I think that for the developing brain, psychedelics used in a responsible, supervised way, it can be incredibly beneficial. And indigenous cultures give psychedelics to toddlers in small amounts.
Yeah.
There's pregnant women doing ayahuasca in ceremonies. Whoa. Yeah. Actually, at my first ayahuasca ceremony, there was a pregnant woman present.
Interesting.
It blew my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, at 16, I turned to my friend when I was on mushrooms and I said, I know what it feels like to be a handful of soil. And I had no concept of this oneness or any of it. It came completely out of this tuning into the universal consciousness, tapping into this knowledge that we all share, but you're right, has been forgotten. And this is why I think spirituality is so beautiful, because it is a remembering, and we all get to the same conclusions when we embark upon this path.
Yeah.
The difference is our cultures and our worldview.
Yeah.
That could make it more of a Christian experience where they're saying, well, do as Jesus would.
Right.
Versus the spiritual but not religious, which is just saying we are all one.
Right.
But it's the same message.
It's the same message. It's like, would you really say that nasty thing to yourself knowing that we're all one? And would Jesus say that? Mm-hmm. Would Baha'u'llah say that? Would...
Right.
No, none of these like spiritual gurus would ever say any of these horrific things that we sit behind a keyboard and say all day. And when we realize that, like, man, this person must be really struggling if they're going to sit there and say some negative things on a Instagram post.
Yeah.
That's on them.
Yeah.
Has nothing necessarily to do. And that's been part of my spiritual development, is to not take things so personally when someone says something that's pointed.
Yeah.
It's like, dang, have you had a hug recently?
That is so profound. I think, doesn't Oprah have a book called What Happened to You?
Oh, she might. I'm not sure.
But when I heard she did, I thought that was just so potent, because that is the question that I ask all the time.
Yeah.
Because it's not what is wrong with you, it's what happened to you to make you hurt so much that this hurt is literally bursting out of you and you need to express it towards others. Yeah, and it's like, if we could hold more compassion, and it takes so much of your own individual growth.
It does.
And that's why we all have a responsibility to be on our own growth path. But if we can hold compassion for others, and when they do harm unto us, we can look at them with love and not blame, not point the finger back at them, then maybe for the first time in their life, they will receive love and compassion, and some spark. They might try to ignore it, but that spark will be lit. Well, it'll be in their mind, and that can set off a snowball effect to completely change their life.
I mean, it's like, you never know who's having a tough day, right? And there was some story I heard about like a grocery store worker, and like someone smiled at them and said, I hope you have a good day. Mm-hmm. And that person had planned that night to go home and kill themselves.
Yeah.
But because that person looked at them in the face and gave them a smile and genuinely said, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Mm-hmm. That made a big difference. And it's like, these little acts of kindness that we forget, we take for granted, that can make a profound shift in someone's life. Maybe that person lives by themselves. Maybe they've been a caregiver and they're watching their parent or their child die, and it's really hard on them, and they still have to go to work, and they're showing up at work, and here they are, and they're just like, now their parent or child has passed and they got nothing left.
Yeah.
They're grocery store clerk, and they're just like, I'm unhappy and unsatisfied with life. And
yeah. And it's allowing someone else, maybe a total stranger, to borrow the strength that you have developed in yourself.
Yeah.
And the reason why spirituality is so important on this path is because we live in such a screwed up world.
We sure do.
There are so many, not even human on human harms. There's so many natural harms that are happening. Natural disasters, an animal attack, if you will.
Fires, hurricanes, earthquakes, boats crashing through bridges.
Yeah, horrendous thing.
All kinds of crazy things that are going on.
Yeah, and so we look at this and people lose faith.
Yeah.
They question what the hell, what kind of God would allow for all of this? And so what we need to do in those times is lean even stronger on faith. And what I do is I acknowledge how humble I am. The human mind was not created to understand all of reality.
Definitely not.
We are only able to perceive a fraction of the sensory information that we bring in, and therefore, how could we understand what some sort of creator has built here?
Right.
There is a point to all of it, and I can only say that because I believe it to be so. But believing it has given me strength to get through the hardest things in my life.
I don't know why this is happening, but I'm sure there's a good reason. I will see when I get to the end of the tunnel, and like, that's that silver lining, right? And seeing that, those hard things in life. There was a frame that I saw recently about miscarriages, and I had one last fall, and it really gutted me, and I was pretty bummed for a while. Feel a lot better about it now, but the reframe was this: it's like that soul that came in, and there's a lot of discrepancy on when conception happens, when the soul enters, and I believe that when conception happens, the soul has entered the organism, and this soul was profound. Like, I'm telling you, like, there's nothing I've experienced in my life like this. That soul was so elevated in its consciousness. It had a lesson to teach my husband and I, and maybe my friends that experienced, or that I shared my experience with, and that little thing taught me so much.
Yeah.
It's like, we learned in school about miscarriages and how hard they are for people, but unless you've really had one or experienced a close friend that's had one, I don't necessarily know that you fully grasp it. But the gift that it gave me was to feel genuine grief. And that is something I've never felt before. Anger is my go-to emotion. It's a lot safer. It's much more powerful. Grief feels consuming in a different way, like you're gonna never come out of it, and that's what I used to think. But after all the tears cleared, I was able to see through the other side, and actually I felt cleansed in this weird way. And it gave me another perspective of grief can show up, and it doesn't have to be hidden underneath of a more powerful emotion like anger.
Yeah.
And grief in and of itself is a very powerful emotion. I would maybe classify it as more of a feminine emotion because of the movement that it is. It's less aggressive like anger. What a gift to provide that with me when I've never been able to feel that way before. That little clip kind of made me think about, wow, things. And again, this is my belief in something that resonated with me based on my spiritual path and my journey. So there's no right or wrong way, but it makes sense to me. And this is something I often hear. Well, if God was so, why would kids get cancer? Why would miscarriages happen? Why would my mom have died in birth? These, these things that are really that's a really good question. I don't have an answer. I don't think most humans are capable of understanding truly the depths of the intangible spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And if we did, I think power would be wielded in a very inappropriate way. Because we're human. We are a soul on a human journey to get to that next level, the next layer of growth. But I also have witnessed enough power-hungry people that they take, and especially in the spiritual realm, unfortunately, in the guise of spirituality or religious context.
Yeah, yeah. My ayahuasca maestra for my the first 2 ceremonies that I've done, she called God the Great Mystery. And that is my favorite term that I have heard for this creator.
Yeah.
Because it is so true that we don't know. And yeah, there is a lot of power behind being in that position and the influence that you could have. And that's why this territory can get very dicey. And, this concept of us being orphaned, it really speaks to why there is such an opportunity for power to be wielded in the wrong way. Because when we don't know, and let's look back, go back to European cultures when they still had pagan practices. They didn't know then, but their faith was so strong in their Norse gods or their Celtic gods that they had a framework that was their truth. But in this day and age, we have opportunity to look at all of that and to be like, I don't know what it is. Maybe all those gods are dancing in the sky. Maybe none of them are. Maybe I'm a reincarnation of one of them.
Right.
There's so many options that it can get overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so we look to people to have answers. And that's very important with the intuition piece too. What we need to be doing is looking into ourselves to have answers. That's a scary thing. If we are not willing and ready to look at ourselves, then we are not going to feel secure on this path. And a lot of people are terrified to look within because they're going to face some shit that's real ugly. Being on your spiritual path is not necessarily pretty. And this is something that we'll bookmark and we can come back around to. But we were going to talk about also just the journeys that I've had, how my psychedelic experiences have shown me some really difficult things. But that power component, so when people are looking to teachers, but these teachers don't know either. That's why my teacher called it the great mystery, because she was humbling herself, which I thought was absolutely beautiful,
Critical.
and eloquent.
I would say that's a green flag to look for in some kind of spiritual like leader or guru of some sort, is someone that is humbled and they're not like, my asshole metaphor of like spiritual, I'm so spiritual. Like we all know those types of people, and those are not, there's nothing wrong with that. I've been there on my journey and like think I know what I'm talking about, and then I'm like, I don't know a damn thing actually.
Very humbling.
I don't know anything at all. And every day I'm learning something new, and every experience I have, and I give the example of like, I don't know if you've ever meditated angry before.
Yes, actually, it felt really good.
It did. It just like, I woke up one day and I was very angry about, I don't even know what. I just woke up upset. And I just made myself sit right there in the corner, and I just sat there. I didn't feel less angry when I got off the mat, but it was like that internal fight with myself of like, why are you so upset? Why can't you calm down? Just calm down. Like, why are you so upset? It's like, you're just going to be angry. I guess you just need to be angry. Just be fucking angry then. Like, just like come to the anger.
Yeah. And I will just comment, that is so beautiful, allowing yourself to be angry.
Yeah.
And that also speaks to the lesson that you got from your miscarriage, allowing yourself to be grieving, because that is the wholeness of the human experience.
It is.
And that is one of the reasons why I think that we are here having this spiritual experience in a human form. Because I believe that we could be reincarnated in different realms and different planets. And in some places, it's like heaven on earth. And we're just there for a soul vacation.
Woo-hoo,
but we chose to be reincarnated here.
Yeah.
We chose it. We signed a little contract with our little ethereal pens. And it said, put me in planet Earth, and this is going to suck, but I am ready to feel in the deepest ways I possibly can.
Yeah, break
to
me
love.
open.
Yeah. And so to experience grief, to experience anger is embarking upon that full spectrum of emotions.
Yeah.
And to learn to have a greater capacity for all of it and develop resiliency with all of that.
Exactly. Well, and those are often thought of as negative emotions, but they are part of the normal human experience. I often wonder is how much we medicate those because we aren't comfortable sitting with, the sadness that comes with losing a potential child, or losing a parent, losing a fill in the blank, whatever it is that we feel like we've lost. But to actually truly feel joy, to truly feel love. Joy is an interesting one because I often find in some of the work I do, patients don't let themselves feel joy. And they don't feel like maybe they've got the weight of the shoulders, maybe they don't feel like they deserve to. It's like, can we find moments of joy?
Yeah.
In the hardship of the world. Like, I'm not saying human life is easy, and we have it pretty good here in America. I gotta say, like, if I want coffee every day, I can have it. Like, I can go to the grocery store and get what I need if I need to. Like, I have gas in my car. Like, I've got a roof over my head. There are some places that, like, people don't know when they're gonna get their next meal. They don't know, if they're in a war zone. Like, we live a pretty cozy life here in the U.S., most of us. Can we allow ourselves to feel joy even though we were born in the United States, I don't know, compared to someone else?
Yeah.
It's like I'm trying to think of like these social justice folks that really want like you to feel and understand the struggle of some of these other groups, and it's like I can. but I'm not them, and that's not my journey on this life.
Yeah, you know, it's like you and Ryan in your interview, he was talking about the sled that creates different neurological pathways in the brain. And I think of this in a similar way. If someone doesn't have the experience of regular joy, or if they don't think that they deserve it, there's an energetic blockade that goes up. And so all of these emotions cause different vibrations. And so one of my spiritual teachers, and she very much took this from this book called Power versus Force, but it comes from a few different places. There's a chart that shows kind of like a funnel, and different emotions are on it. And so at the low end is the lowest vibration, and that's like rage, hatred, fear, And as you climb up it, then you get up to, in the middle, the one that really surprised me was courage. Because for a lot of my life, I have been living my life courageous, and I thought that that was a really noble thing. But she has a black line. Right above courageous is coming into the highest states of frequency. Courageous is right below. And so it's what we are utilizing when we are still protecting ourselves from fear. But above it is states like joy, states like contentment, and then, of course, just awareness, being, highest consciousness. And so we can't just jump up to joy. We need to allow ourselves to go through these different vibrations, these different frequencies, and build up the capacity to get there. So Esther Hicks, through Abraham Hicks, talks about this. Are you familiar?
I'm familiar with Abraham Hicks.
Yeah, so Esther Hicks, this is some real woo-woo shit right here. So if the audience has any difficulty with the woo, just, take it with a grain of salt.
Just lean back. Just lean back.
So Esther Hicks is an individual who channeled a group of spirits, of entities, which have named themselves Abraham Hicks. And so they are the first ones to really popularize manifestation.
Okay.
Yeah, the law of attraction.
Sure.
Actually, she was featured in the first Law of Attraction movie, the original, and they cut her out because Abraham was too woo. So even though it was like, it comes from Abraham. Anyway, the politics in the woo world. And her book is really wonderful, and it speaks to the exercise of, if you're feeling an emotion like rage, then look at the chart that they provide, which shows different degrees of emotions that are vibrating one step higher, and see if you can get to that next one. If you're feeling rage, can you turn it into something smaller? Just some anger. Can you channel, I'm so angry at something right now. And then will you allow yourself to feel sadness? And so it really is climbing a ladder out of this emotional hole that you're in. And so to allow yourself to tune into that spiritual process, I am growing, I am developing a greater capability to feel the full spectrum of human emotions. I am becoming more whole of a human through that process, and leaning on the faith that this is what we're supposed to be doing, that you are learning through that process.
And that's not pretty.
It's not. It's so ugly.
That's not pretty, and that's not what like spiritual gurus and people posting on social media are showing you. And I'm not also saying that you need to be going into the woods and paying $4,000 for a group so you can like bang sticks on the ground and be pissed off at the patriarchy. That's not what I'm saying either. What I'm saying is that it's appropriate to experience a spectrum of emotions, and we are disallowing ourselves the true experience of what it means to be a human by not feeling. By not feeling.
Numb. We live in a society, and this is also part of the psychedelics conversation. Psychedelics was demonized because it was tuning us in. And because we live in a culture of buy things to make yourself feel better, like shopping therapy. Oh my gosh, all the number of times when I was in med school and going to Goodwill made me feel so much better.
Right, less pricey than going to like some fancy store and spending like $1,000 on a pair of shoes.
Exactly,
But still.
I can get a lot of stuff though. But yeah, so it's all about numbing, and it's taking us away from true meaning. And I read this book, The Radical Homemaker, quite a while ago. And she talked about how with the feminist movement, with women going into the workforce, advertisers saw an opportunity. They're like, amazing. Now we can advertise that homes don't need one car, but 2 cars. Because now the woman needs to get to work also. Yeah. And now we can advertise that you need to have a computer at home, whatever it was to make the woman feel more independent.
Yeah.
Then the movement shifted, and it wasn't all about marketing about the latest like baked kitchen appliance, you know?
Right.
Uh-huh.
Isn't that interesting? I've often said marketing should be illegal. That's a whole nother conversation. I feel like conditioning makes a big portion of, you know, those feelings. And so if we stay in a perpetual state of fear, keeping up with the Joneses, I got to have the newest thing, the newest technology, the newest car, the newest smart device, then I'm always in a perpetual state of need, which I imagine is a pretty low vibrating.
Yes.
Like need, take, get. But what about creating? In Baha'i, they talk about creating is the closest thing to God that we can get. When we are creating this podcast, creating relationships, working on building a trail, or, you know, maybe you're a painter, maybe you're a writer. When we are creating from our soul, like truly, that is a way for us to get closer. Now we can talk about safety, and like if a person doesn't feel safe, then they don't have a place that they feel like they can actually fully open up and be creative, which is probably a whole nother conversation too. I'd be curious about how your journeys have helped shifted your prerogative in this realm to help you feel a different way or more understanding towards your experience as a human today.
Yeah. So, like I said, I started doing psychedelics when I was 16, and that turned me on to my own spiritual path. And I was very disconnected. And full transparency, it is still something that I am working on expanding. Actually, I would say my spirituality started before that. When I was in middle school, I started being curious about paganism. And it was just something I needed to know. Me and my friends started casting circles, and we started playing with the Ouija board, which personally I don't recommend anymore. But
no, please don't do that. I agree. Weird things.
Yeah, weird things. But it showed us this realm of possibility. And I learned about crystals, and I was like, ooh, that sounds fun. I could connect with the energy of a crystal. Picked it up, didn't feel shit. And that was kind of, it got me down.
Yeah, it's like, why can't I feel this?
Yeah. But instead of being turned away from spirituality, I was like, how can I turn on this sensitivity? And so I kind of got dropped for a number of years until I picked up psychedelics. And then I was like, oh yeah, there is something here. I was onto something. I was intuitively onto something. And so have been following that thread through so long, and a lot of my own personal healing, even without considering the spiritual component of it, but developing myself had, whether I was conscious of it or not, brought me closer to spirituality because I was expanding, I was becoming more loving. And so in more recent years, my most recent psychedelic experience was doing a psilocybin journey, and I didn't intend to do this journey. And this is where the synchronicities come into play, which is another thing that tells me we are living in something so much fucking greater.
So much bigger than what we can even potentially imagine.
I don't believe in coincidences. Even the smallest of coincidences, maybe it's just like, a little energetic flutter that crosses by, but there are things that are happening for reasons. And so I went to a circle in Denver for rapé, which is a medicine that comes from the Amazon. It's a tobacco snuff, and you put it in a device. Either there's one that's shaped like a horn and it's served to you, or there's one that's shaped like a V and you self-administer with part in your mouth, part in your nostril.
I see.
And so it's tobacco snuff mixed with various other plants, which is what creates the different energy of each one. And the medicine has a duality of chaos and grounding. When you first do it, holy shit, it is so intense and uncomfortable, dare I say very painful. And then you allow yourself to move through that chaos and find your center and your peace. It's a beautiful medicine. And I met someone there who was interested in possibly taking on apprentices. And so I have been opening myself up to becoming a psychedelic facilitator. And so I was like, yeah, I'd be interested in pursuing that with you. But the first step with her was doing a psilocybin journey with her. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really feel like I need this right now, but this came to me.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to pursue it. And that is a part of faith, not forcing things in your life, but allowing things to unravel and trusting the process.
Yeah.
And so on our first preparation call, we're having a conversation. I'm using all these words to describe my life. I feel like I'm treading water. I feel like I'm scared to jump into the deep end of things.
I've heard you say these things too. I feel like I'm treading water is definitely so interesting.
Yeah. And so these patterns that have been with me for quite some time, they were coming up in conversation. I'm not even on the medicine yet, but the medicine works as soon as you agree to it, as soon as you say yes. And then she asked me, have you ever had any large traumas in your life? And I'm like, well, a bunch of little T's, but the only big trauma, and I've never needed to bring this up before, is that I almost drowned when I was 2. And then boom, it hit me like a train. All of these analogies I was making was going back to that drowning. Wow. And I've done medicine how many times in my life and it hadn't come up?
Yeah.
And so it really told me that my path up until this point has prepared me for this major point, for this major thing that I was finally ready to unwind in me. And so I went to the ceremony and I was like, I don't know if this is gonna come up. We'll see. Clearly it did. The whole time I felt like I was drowning under life. And it brought me full circle. I didn't bring it to full conclusion in that ceremony, which for me, because it was a disembodying experience, almost drowning, for me, it would be really re-embodying myself. But it gave me the realization that this experience put an imprint on my nervous system. And it separated me. It caused me to not feel that great depth of emotions. And I think it disconnected me from source. So like when I was a kid and couldn't feel crystals, I think that this is a major part of what turned off my energetic sensors. And so all of this time I've been priming myself to turn it back on. And so to speak to the power of psychedelics, but also we have to continue to do the work afterwards. So after that, I decided I was going to do EMDR. And that therapy has been beautiful because I did have a re-embodiment experience in that.
EMDR, for the listeners, is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a type of psychotherapy I cannot recommend enough. It works really, really well to process, and what's really amazing about it is you don't have to divulge every detail of the horrific thing that you went through. You just kind of start feeling it, and it helps your body to process. Process and file away so that you can access that memory without accessing every pointed emotion that comes with it.
Yeah, it's like unteasing it from the tentacles of our nervous system and allowing ourselves to create a new story. So I processed it through that. And it didn't take that many sessions, and we decided we're going to continue to work on other things that have probably unraveled from that. But that's the spiritual journey of self-growth. So you need to have courage, right? But courage is not the transcendent vibration. Courage is what brings you to the point of, I am going to do the hard thing.
Break through the threshold.
So that has been that journey that has been enabling me to really open my eyes to how much more there is in this world. The great breadth of the human experience.
So when you hold a crystal, can you feel?
A little bit. Still working on it.
Some things are more potent for me than others. It doesn't always show up exactly the way I would like it to either for me. It's like sometimes I walk into a room and I'm like, this is not the room I need to be in. I'm going to leave.
For me, it's always been people. I can very much feel people's energy. And I could feel if I could feel if someone is allowing something to haunt them or not.
Totally.
And, this is, I think, a really important part of the spiritual path, too. There's these concepts that we can have negative energy latch onto us. We can have an entity haunting us. And all of that is true if we allow it to be so.
Well, what about the whole thing of like medicine circles allowing people that are drunk, they are high, they are on multiple substances at once? Alcohol, is my understanding, is one of the worst substances we can consume, especially with some sort of spiritual practice, because it's not in our control anymore. We've been so inebriated that we don't have the capacity to maintain a boundary.
Right. So I want to circle back to that for sure.
Yeah.
But so for this point, there has been times in my life when I felt like I was having so much difficulty that there must be an entity latched onto me.
Sure.
And then, so in my first ayahuasca circle, I had that validated. I was told that there was a giant octopus-like creature with its tentacles wrapped around me.
Ooh, another water thing.
I know, I did note that. And so working through that, doing a lot of clearing work and being very disturbed that another entity had the power to grab hold of me. But continuing to do my work and learning more, reading work of various medicine healers and listening to podcasts of those who have been in this realm for a long time, I realized that the only reason that entity existed is because I gave it my power.
I allowed.
Yeah. And so when we realize just how much autonomy we can choose to have, then we take power away from anything, any curse or hex or demonic being that would be entertained with the idea of latching on. The only reason that these things have some sort of consciousness is because we've given it enough intention to birth it. We create it. So taking our power back is such a major process on this spiritual path that, empowerment is one of my mantras. It's like one of my biggest things. We need to own our ability to do our own healing, to create our own reality.
You're talking about something that's important to me as well, radical self-responsibility. It's like if we just own everything that happens to us, regardless of what happened, who cares who did what, when happened, if we allow ourselves to just say, I gave this weird octopus thing my power. I have felt that too when I've had soul retrievals and clearings of things and having entities on myself, and it wasn't as profound as the experience you're sharing, but thinking back, it's like what role did I play in allowing those things to get into my space and stay with me in my space.
Yeah.
It's like breaking through that threshold from going from courage to some of those higher vibrating emotional states. It's like we hold on to these things because they sound good.
Yeah. And, not to say that, because people can take on a place of blame, right?
Sure, that's not what we're saying here.
Yeah. And so when I think about this for my own personal journey, when I was a little kid, there was the weirdest sensation that I had a hole right through my abdomen.
Weird.
And I knew it was weird back then, but I didn't know what to do with it.
Sure.
And so I wonder with my spirituality what I came into this life with. And so there's only so much we can do with what we have in this current paradigm. Perhaps if we were living in a traditional culture that had an understanding of all of this, maybe when I was born, that hole would have been recognized by some healer and closed.
Right.
But we come into this world with this broken spirituality. And so it makes sense that these opportunity for things like the octopus are going to come up. Right. But that's why it is so important for us to give ourselves so much love to be on this path and to know we deserve to heal.
Yeah, exactly. That is that we know that we deserve this capacity, and it's investing in ourselves and taking time to not only get to know ourselves, but get to know our patterns and our beliefs. And one thing I like to do with some of my clientele is a values exercise. And that tells us right there your top 5 most important things to you. And some people, they're 60 years old and they've never considered what their values are.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you move through the world with knowing what your values are. And I mean, we do, and I'm not it's not a judgment. It's just like, that's profound to me, because when that concept was brought to my attention, I was just like, oh my God, how have I been living in an authentic way, true to myself, not knowing the things that are the most important to me.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And radical self-responsibility is different than blame. Not blaming, like, oh, I should have known better. Why didn't I know better? I was just dumb. It's like, you do the best you can with what you have with what you know.
Exactly.
And you don't know until you know. And then when you know, you're like, oh, I just learned something new. And like, again, that's taking that humble approach rather than like the blaming, the victim-y, the little bit yuckier stuff.
Yeah. And it's ugly, especially in the start, because we may be in a place where we're blaming ourselves, but we're not capable of anything else.
Yeah.
But, and we've talked about this before, the ability to hold two different things as true at the same time. Doing that for ourselves and being like, God, I cannot stop calling myself a shithead, but also in the next breath, I'm going to say I am worthy.
Yeah.
I know that this is a part of the journey.
Exactly. No, it's so true. It's like, there are things that I've done in my life that I'm not very proud of. And it's like, maybe, I learned some things from that, but I also know that that was the lesson, that was the thing I needed to learn in that moment. And so I can give myself that peace and say, okay, well, again, you did the best you could with what you knew at the time, and that's going to be good enough.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got a few minutes left. I didn't get to talk about everything, but that's allowing and going with the flow of the conversation. And I think this has been a really important conversation. I'd like to wrap it up with a little more conversation around like what an orphaned culture is and why you think there is this profound like grasping almost at anything that could give us some kind of insight to who we are.
Yeah. So living here in America, we are descendants of people who broke away from their mother culture and decided to create something new. So we're rebellious from our very nature. That tore us away, along with the concept of monotheism and structured religion, which speaking strictly to all of the structure in that took us away from our spirituality. I want to say that, of course, there's a lot of good in religion that feeds people, but it took away people's ability to identify with God themselves. And so there's this really wonderful book called The Road to Ulysses, which speculates that Christianity took its original sacrament from the psychedelic rites of ancient Greece. And those psychedelic rites allowed people to get close to spirit themselves. And the psychedelic rites itself is a theory that is also very controversial. But just for this theory that we used to be connected to God on our own right. We didn't need any structure. We didn't need a priest, a rabbi, or anything to be between us and God. It was us. And now here we are. So many people have broken away from that religious structure because it's not working for them anymore, but they still know there's something greater. And so they're grasping and they're doing harm in that process because we're wandering around like toddlers. We're in this transition period where we have no clue what to do with spirituality. And so we're genuinely curious, but there are those cultures that we're turning to, indigenous cultures that still hold these with so much reverence, and we're asking them to share. And so there is this really painful rift right now of this hurt within us seeking something, and those who have been so harmed by colonial culture being really scared to share because this is what they have to hold on to still. When we've taken their culture away and we've taken their way of community, we have torn down their political structures, we've taken their land, they still have their spirituality, and here we are asking to share.
I know.
And it's a really difficult place to be in because what other option do we have? The world is going to continue to hurt. We're going to continue to hurt each other without coming to a new universal spirituality.
Yeah, I I resonate with that. That is something that's really important, and we have amends to make, and I don't know what the right answer is. But I do know it is a fucking big ask for us to ask these indigenous cultures to share their spiritual practices with us colonials. And, America is a melting pot of lots of cultures. We are one of the only countries that says, come to our country as an immigrant. And, it's kind of an interesting place culturally, and I appreciate that. At the same time, we have to look at history and not just sweep it under a rug.
Yeah.
And so hopefully we can come to some kind of middle ground where we're feeling like we're being served and medicine's not being abused. That's something that's I'm tread very lightly with medicine circles, being mindful and wanting to respect cultural reverence for the medicines and making sure it's done correctly.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I can't believe it's been a whole hour.
Wow.
So we've talked about what is spiritualism and spiritual growth and the importance of it. We've talked about it being kind of like an awareness, but also kind of giving us a space to connect with God or the universe on our own right, on our own terms, and how exploring other faiths can be really valuable. And it's not just spiritual materialism, but it's like, how else can this be done? Kind of gives us another perspective. We talked about Lisa's personal experience with psychedelics and the value that she found there, and realizing she had a pretty profound experience, and even the language that she was using. So what language are we using that is maybe, giving cues as to why we're feeling so stuck or whatever the experience that we're having? And we talked about, I did not know Esther Hicks was different than Abraham Hicks, so that's really interesting. Abraham Hicks is someone that I don't personally follow, but I follow a couple people on social media that have some good skits, and they're like really well done, and I'll send you him. He's really good. In her book, The Power versus Force, right? And that's where that like little funnel of emotions.
They're two different authors, but yeah.
Oh, two different authors. Oh, excuse me. Power versus Force is not Esther Hicks, but that's where you got the layers of emotions. And I've seen that picture before. You can probably Google it. And we talked a little bit briefly about the brokenness and the orphanness of breaking away and like having the rebellion to come to a quote unquote new continent and start anew. But then that creates this rugged individualism that we have in America. It's such an interesting dynamic. We like want so much to have culture and spirituality and spiritual practices that are different than what most of us grew up with, a religious structure. So my next guest, I'm really excited for. Next month, we are going to be talking about regenerative agriculture. I have a chicken producer who's going to be coming on. I'm really excited to chat with him. He is the first producer in the state of Colorado to be licensed or whatever to have his facility that's not like a giant mega corporation. So I'm really proud of his endeavors there because it's not easy, and maybe he'll share why growing chickens is a pain in the butt, and in my experience they're little velociraptors, so keep aware of that. And for those of you that would like to follow Lisa, how can my listeners find you?
The best way would be finding me at my website, rootednaturopathy.com.
Okay. rootednaturopathy.com. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. And if you guys liked this or found this conversation a little controversial and you want to share it with someone that you can have a conversation with, or you have something you want to share with Lisa or I, drop it in the comments. Please like and subscribe. I do this out of the kindness of my heart, but I also really want us to grow as a humanity. So that helps me help you guys more. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.